The sound of boots crunching through gravel woke Theodora Flynn from her sleep, but by the time her eyes flew open in the dim pre-dawn light of her small tent, the damage was already done. She bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized the claim stakes that had marked her land boundaries were gone, and three men were riding away into the Texas darkness with her documentation tucked into their saddlebags. The gold claim she had worked for 6 back-breaking months in Laredo, Texas, in this unforgiving year of 1881, had just been stolen from her while exhaustion had finally claimed her body after days of digging and panning. Theodora scrambled out of her bedroll, her dark auburn hair falling loose from its braid as she threw on her boots and ran outside. The October air bit at her skin through her thin nightdress, but she barely noticed as she stared at the empty spots where her stakes had been driven deep into the rocky soil. Her hands shook as she dropped to her knees, searching for any evidence, any proof that this land had been rightfully claimed by her. Nothing remained except the disturbed earth where the wooden markers had stood. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice cracking as reality crashed over her like a cold wave. Without those stakes and the documentation she had filed with the land office, she had no legal proof of her claim. Those men had taken everything in one calculated move. She stood slowly, her 22-year-old body trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. She had come to Texas from Missouri after her father died, leaving her with nothing but debts and a burning desire to make something of herself. The gold claim had been her salvation, her chance at independence in a world that wanted to see women like her married off or working in saloons. She had struck a decent vein 3 weeks ago, nothing spectacular but enough to give her hope for a real future. Now it was gone. Theodora forced herself to breathe, to think. The men had ridden east, toward the main part of Laredo. They would likely head to the land office as soon as it opened to file the claim under their own names. She had maybe 3 hours before the office opened its doors at 8 in the morning. 3 hours to figure out how to prove that the claim was hers, that she had been working this land since April. She dressed quickly in her worn brown split skirt and white blouse, her fingers fumbling with the buttons as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She strapped on her father's old gun belt, though she had never been much of a shot, and grabbed her hat. The town was a 20-minute ride on her mare Daisy if she pushed hard. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of orange and pink when Theodora reached the outskirts of Laredo. The town was still mostly asleep, with only a few early risers moving about their business. She rode straight to the land office, her heart sinking when she saw it was still locked up tight. She dismounted and tried the door anyway, knowing it was futile, but desperate enough to try. "They do not open for another 2 hours," a deep voice said from behind her. Theodora spun around, her hand instinctively moving toward her gun. A tall man stood in the shadow of the building next door, his hat pulled low over his eyes. As he stepped into the growing light, she could make out strong features, a jaw covered in dark stubble, and eyes that were a startling shade of gray. He wore the typical garb of a cowboy, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a dark shirt, and a vest that had seen better days. A gun hung low on his hip, the holster well-oiled and clearly used. "I know when they open," Theodora said, her voice sharper than she intended. She was in no mood for conversation with strangers, not when her entire future hung in the balance. The man raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "I meant no offense, miss. You just look like someone who has had a rough morning." "That is putting it mildly," Theodora muttered, turning back to stare at the locked door as if she could will it to open through sheer determination. "Name is Samuel Yates," the man said, moving closer. "Most folks call me Sam. I could not help but notice you rode in like the devil himself was chasing you." Theodora studied him for a moment, weighing whether to trust this stranger. Something in his eyes seemed genuine, and she was desperate enough to take the risk. "Someone stole my gold claim," she said finally. "Pulled up my stakes and took my documentation while I slept. They are probably on their way here right now to file it under their own names." Sam's expression darkened. That is about as low as a man can get. You have any proof the claim was yours first? Nothing except my word and the fact that I have been working that land for 6 months, Theodora said bitterly. My name is Theodora Flynn, and I filed the original claim back in April. But if they get to that office before I can convince someone to help me, my word will not mean much of anything. The land office clerk is a man named Porter, Sam said thoughtfully. He is honest enough, but he goes by the letter of the law. If those men show up with stakes and documentation, he will process their claim without question, especially if you cannot prove yours came first. Theodora felt her hope crumbling. Then what am I supposed to do? Just let them steal 6 months of my life? Let them take the gold I found through my own hard work? Sam was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes studying her face. How many men were there? 3, Theodora answered. I saw them riding away. Big fellows, all of them. They looked like they knew exactly what they were doing. Sounds like the Hutchins brothers, Sam said, his voice taking on a hard edge. Carl, Pike, and Jesse Hutchins. They have been working claims in the area, and there have been rumors that not all their land was acquired honestly. But nobody has been able to prove anything, and they are mean enough that most folks do not want to cross them. Well, they crossed the wrong woman, Theodora said fiercely. I am not going to just roll over and let them take what is mine. A slow smile spread across Sam's face. I believe that. Tell me, Miss Flynn, would you accept help from a stranger who happens to think claim jumping is one of the lowest things a man can do? Theodora's heart jumped. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. Let us just say I have a particular dislike for the Hutchins brothers, Sam said. They ran my younger brother off a claim 2 years ago. He ended up working in a mine in Colorado and got killed in a collapse last winter. I have been waiting for a chance to see them get what they deserve. The pain in his voice was real, and Theodora felt a surge of sympathy mixed with her own anger. I am sorry about your brother, she said quietly. And yes, I would be grateful for any help you can offer. I do not know what I can do against 3 men on my own. First thing we need to do is beat them to Porter, Sam said. Where exactly is your claim located? Theodora described the location, a stretch of land about 5 miles northeast of town, along a creek bed that had shown promising signs of gold. Sam nodded as she spoke, clearly familiar with the area. I know that spot, he said. Good land. You filed the claim in April, you said? April 15th, Theodora confirmed. I have been working it ever since. There are tools out there, my tent, evidence that someone has been digging and panning for months. That has to count for something. It might if we can get Porter to see it before he processes their claim, Sam said. But we need a better plan than just showing up and hoping he believes you over them. They stood in silence for a moment, both thinking hard. The sky was growing lighter by the minute, and Theodora could feel precious time slipping away. The assay office, Sam said suddenly. Have you taken any of your gold there to be tested and weighed? Theodora's eyes widened. Yes, twice. Once in June and again in September. I sold some of the gold to buy supplies. Then there will be records with your name on them, Sam said with satisfaction. Records that prove you were working that claim months ago. The Hutchins brothers cannot fake that. Hope flared in Theodora's chest. The assay office opens at 7, she said. We could get the records and bring them to Porter before the Hutchins brothers even show up. Exactly, Sam agreed. But we need to move fast. The assay office is on the other side of town, and if the Hutchins brothers think of the same thing, we will have a problem. They set off at a fast walk, leading their horses through the awakening streets of Laredo. The town was beginning to stir, with shopkeepers opening their doors and the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting from the restaurant on Main Street. Theodora's stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, but there was no time to stop. The assay office was a small building wedged between a blacksmith and a general store. A light was already burning in the window, which Theodora took as a good sign. Sam tied their horses to the rail outside and opened the door, gesturing for Theodora to enter first. A small, bespectacled man looked up from behind a counter covered in scales and testing equipment. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "You folks are early risers. What can I do for you?" "I need copies of my assay records," Theodora said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the urgency pounding through her veins. "My name is Theodora Flynn. I brought gold in for testing in June and September." The man adjusted his glasses and pulled out a large ledger. "Flynn, you said? Let me see here." He ran his finger down the page, flipped to another section, and nodded. "Yes, here we are. Theodora Flynn brought in 4 ounces in June, 6 ounces in September. Good quality gold, too, about 80% pure. Would you like documentation of these transactions?" "Yes, please," Theodora said, relief washing over her. "As quickly as possible. It is urgent." The assayer must have heard the desperation in her voice, because he moved with more speed than his methodical nature seemed to suggest. Within 10 minutes, Theodora had 2 official documents bearing the assay office seal, her name, and the dates of her transactions. "Thank you," she said fervently, clutching the papers like they were made of gold themselves. They hurried back to the land office, where a small crowd had begun to gather outside. Theodora's heart sank when she saw 3 large men on horseback approaching from the other direction. Even from a distance, she recognized them as the ones who had stolen her claim. "That is them," she told Sam, her hand tightening on the assay records. Sam's jaw clenched. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. "And let me do most of the talking if it comes to a confrontation. The Hutchins brothers respect force more than reason." The 3 men dismounted just as a thin man in a brown suit unlocked the land office door. This had to be Porter, the clerk Sam had mentioned. He looked harried and tired, like a man who dealt with too much paperwork and not enough gratitude. "Mr. Porter," Theodora called out, rushing forward before the Hutchins brothers could enter the office. "I need to speak with you urgently about a claim dispute." Porter looked at her over his wire-rimmed glasses, then at the 3 large men behind her, and sighed. "Come inside, all of you, but keep it civil. I will not have fighting in my office." They filed into the small office, which immediately felt cramped with so many bodies. The Hutchins brothers were even larger up close, all 3 of them standing well over 6 feet with broad shoulders and hard faces. The oldest one, who Theodora guessed was Carl, stepped forward with a stack of papers in his hand. "We are here to file a claim on land northeast of town, along the creek bed," Carl said, his voice rough as gravel. "Got our stakes and documentation right here." "That is my claim," Theodora said loudly, stepping up beside him. "Those stakes and that documentation were stolen from my land while I slept early this morning. I filed the original claim in April." Carl turned to look at her, and his expression was one of amused contempt. "That is a serious accusation, little lady. You got any proof of that?" "I have proof that I have been working that land for 6 months, Theodora said, slapping the assay office records onto Porter's desk. "These documents show that I brought gold from that claim for testing in June and September. You cannot fake records from the assay office." Porter picked up the papers and examined them carefully. His expression remained neutral, but Theodora could see the wheels turning in his mind. "These are legitimate assay records," Porter said slowly. "They prove Miss Flynn was working a gold claim and selling the product months ago." He looked at Carl. "Can you provide similar documentation?" "We just staked the claim this morning," Carl said, his easy confidence faltering slightly. "Found the land abandoned and figured it was free for the taking." "The land was not abandoned," Theodora said hotly. "My tent is still there, my tools, everything. You pulled up my stakes and stole my documentation." "That is a lie," Pike, the middle brother, growled. "We found empty land and claimed it legal-like." Sam had been standing quietly near the door, but now he stepped forward. "Funny thing about that," he said, his voice deceptively casual. I was out riding early this morning and saw three men matching your descriptions heading away from Miss Flynn's claim just before dawn. Seemed odd, given that you are claiming you staked it this morning when the sun was already up. The Hutchins brothers all turned to stare at Sam, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Who the hell are you?" Carl demanded. "Name is Samuel Yates," Sam said, meeting Carl's glare without flinching. "And I saw what I saw. You calling us thieves?" Jesse, the youngest brother, asked, his hand drifting toward his gun. "I am calling what I saw," Sam said calmly. "And what I saw was three men riding away from Miss Flynn's claim before sunrise with their saddlebags full." Porter held up his hands. "Gentlemen and lady, I will not have gunplay in my office. Now, we have a situation here that needs to be resolved legally." He looked at the assay records again, then at the documentation the Hutchins brothers had provided. Miss Flynn has evidence that she was working a claim in this area for months. The Hutchins brothers have stakes and documentation, but no history of working the land. "So what are you saying?" Carl demanded. "I am saying that I cannot process your claim without further investigation," Porter said firmly. "If Miss Flynn filed a claim in April, there should be a record of it in this office. Let me check the files." He disappeared into a back room, leaving them all standing in uncomfortable silence. Theodora could feel the weight of the Hutchins brothers' stares, and she was grateful for Sam's solid presence beside her. She had no doubt that without him, this confrontation would have gone very differently. Porter returned several minutes later, carrying a thick file. His expression was grim. "I found the original filing," he said, looking at Theodora. "Claim filed by Theodora Flynn on April 15th, 1881, for land along the northeastern creek bed. The description matches the land the Hutchins brothers are trying to claim today." Relief flooded through Theodora so powerfully that her knees almost buckled. "So the claim is still mine?" "The claim is still yours," Porter confirmed. "However, you will need to replace your stakes and get new documentation, since the originals appear to have been removed." Carl's face had gone red with anger. "This is not over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "That land should be ours." "The land belongs to Miss Flynn, legally and rightfully," Porter said, his voice taking on a steely edge that suggested he was braver than he looked. "And if I hear of any more interference with her claim, I will notify the marshal. Claim jumping is a serious crime in Texas. Gentlemen, I suggest you remember that." The Hutchins brothers stood there for a long moment, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Finally, Carl turned and stalked out of the office, his brothers following close behind. Theodora watched them go, her relief mixing with a new fear. Men like that did not forget when they were beaten, and they certainly did not forgive. "Thank you, Mr. Porter," Theodora said, her voice shaking slightly. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not found that original filing." "Just doing my job, miss," Porter said, but he looked pleased. "Now, let us get you set up with new stakes and documentation. I will have everything ready by this afternoon." Outside the office, Sam touched Theodora's elbow gently. "You should not go back to your claim alone," he said. "The Hutchins brothers are not the type to accept defeat gracefully. They will be looking for revenge." Theodora knew he was right, but the thought of abandoning her claim made her stomach twist. "I cannot just leave it unguarded. They could destroy everything I have worked for out of spite." "I am not suggesting you leave it unguarded," Sam said. "I am suggesting you let me help you guard it. Two people can keep watch better than one, and I am fairly good with a gun if it comes to that." Theodora studied his face, seeing genuine concern in those gray eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You barely know me." "Maybe I see something of my brother in you," Sam said quietly. He had that same stubborn determination to make something of himself, to prove he could succeed on his own terms. The Hutchins brothers took that away from him, and I will be damned if I let them do it to someone else. The rawness in his voice touched something deep in Theodora's chest. "I am sorry for what happened to your brother," she said. and I would be grateful for your help. I cannot pay you much, but I can share whatever gold we find." Sam shook his head. "I do not want your gold. I want to make sure you get to keep what is rightfully yours. That is payment enough." They spent the rest of the morning gathering supplies and picking up the new stakes and documentation from Porter. By early afternoon, they were riding back out to Theodora's claim. As they approached, Theodora's heart sank. Her tent had been slashed to ribbons, her tools scattered and some broken, and someone had dumped dirt back into the promising hole she had been excavating. "They came back," she said, her voice hollow as she surveyed the destruction. "They did this while we were in town." Sam dismounted and walked through the debris, his expression grim. "They wanted to send you a message. They wanted you to know they could get to you whenever they pleased." Theodora felt tears of frustration burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had not cried when her father died, had not cried through all the hardships of the past 6 months, and she was not going to start now. Instead, she channeled her grief into anger, using it to fuel her determination. "Then we send them a message back," she said, dismounting and starting to gather her scattered tools. "We show them that I am not going anywhere." Sam smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I was hoping you would say that. Let us get to work." They spent the rest of the day putting things back together. Sam proved to be handy with repairs, fixing the broken handle on Theodora's shovel and patching her tent with a piece of canvas he had brought from town. Theodora cooked them a simple meal of beans and cornbread over the fire as the sun began to set, painting the Texas sky in shades of crimson and gold. "Tomorrow we will drive the new stakes," Sam said, accepting a plate of food with a nod of thanks. "And I will help you clear out that hole they filled in. The sooner you get back to working your claim properly, the sooner you will have more gold to show for it." "I still cannot believe you are doing all this," Theodora said, sitting down across the fire from him. "We only met this morning." "Feels longer than that, does it not?" Sam said with a slight smile. "Guess that is what happens when you spend a day fighting off claim jumpers and rebuilding a camp." Theodora found herself smiling back. "I suppose you are right. Still, I am grateful. I do not think I could have stood up to the Hutchins brothers on my own." "You were doing a pretty good job of it when I showed up," Sam pointed out. "You have more fire in you than most men twice your size." The compliment made Theodora's cheeks warm, and she looked down at her plate. She was not used to kind words from men, especially not men who looked like Sam. Most of the miners and prospectors she encountered treated her either with condescension or unwanted attention. Sam treated her like an equal, and it was refreshing in a way that made her chest feel tight. They talked late into the night, sharing stories about their lives. Theodora learned that Sam had grown up on a ranch in Oklahoma, that he had come to Texas after his brother's death because he could not stand to stay in a place filled with memories. He was 27 years old, had never been married, and spent most of his time drifting from town to town, doing odd jobs and cowboy work. In turn, Theodora told him about her father, a dreamer who had always chased the next big opportunity until his gambling debts finally caught up with him. She told him about her mother, who had died when Theodora was just 10, and about the decision to come to Texas and try to make something of herself in the gold fields. "You are braver than you think," Sam said when she finished. "Coming out here alone, working a claim by yourself in a world that does not make things easy for women. That takes courage. Or foolishness," Theodora said with a rueful laugh. "I am not always sure which." "Courage," Sam said firmly. "Definitely courage." They set up a watch schedule, with Sam taking the first shift while Theodora tried to sleep in her repaired tent. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. She kept thinking about the Hutchins brothers, wondering if they would come back in the night to cause more trouble. But she also found herself thinking about Sam, about the way his gray eyes crinkled when he smiled, and the steadiness of his presence. She finally drifted off to the sound of Sam's quiet movements around the camp, feeling safer than she had in months. The next few days fell into a rhythm. They drove the new stakes deep into the ground, each one reinforced with rocks and concrete to make them harder to remove. They worked together to clear out the hole the Hutchins brothers had filled, and to Theodora's delight, they hit a new vein of gold that was even richer than the one she had been working before. Sam proved to be a skilled worker, strong and tireless, and Theodora found herself enjoying his company more with each passing day. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh at unexpected moments. He also had a gentleness about him that contrasted with his rough exterior, evident in the way he treated the horses and in the care he took with their camp. On the fifth night, as they sat around the fire after another long day of work, Sam asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "What are you going to do with the gold once you have enough? Do you plan to stay in Laredo?" Theodora considered the question carefully. "I had not thought much beyond surviving and keeping my claim," she admitted. "But I suppose I would like to have my own place someday. A real house, not just a tent. Maybe some land where I could raise horses or cattle. Something permanent." "That sounds like a good dream," Sam said softly. "You deserve that kind of life after everything you have been through." "What about you?" Theodora asked. "What is your dream? Or are you planning to drift forever?" Sam stared into the fire for a long moment. "I used to think I wanted to keep moving, never settling down in one place long enough to feel tied down. But lately I have been wondering if that is just another way of running away from things." "What would you be running from?" Theodora asked gently. "Failure, maybe. Disappointment. The feeling that I should have done more to help my brother, that I should have been there when he needed me." Sam's voice was rough with emotion. "He wrote to me about the Hutchins brothers, told me they were pressuring him to leave his claim. I wrote back and told him to stand his ground, to not let them push him around. Instead of coming to help him, I just sent words on paper. And then he was gone." Theodora reached across the small space between them and placed her hand on Sam's arm. The gesture felt natural, right? "You could not have known what would happen, and your brother made his own choices. You cannot carry that burden forever." Sam looked down at her hand, then up at her face. The firelight danced in his eyes, and Theodora felt her breath catch. There was something happening between them, something that had been building since that first morning in Laredo. It terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. "Being here, helping you," Sam said slowly, "it feels like maybe I am making up for not being there for him, like maybe I am finally doing something right." "You are doing more than something right," Theodora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You are saving my life, my dream. I do not know how I could ever thank you enough." Sam turned his hand over so that his palm was against hers, his fingers curling around her smaller ones. "You do not have to thank me, Teddy." The nickname came out naturally, affectionately. "I am right where I want to be." The moments stretched between them, charged with possibilities. Theodora's heart was racing, and she wondered if Sam could feel her pulse through her wrist. She had never been this close to a man before, not in this way. Part of her wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of distance, but a larger part of her wanted to lean in, to see what would happen if she was brave enough to take that step. Before either of them could move, the sharp crack of a gunshot shattered the night air. Sam was on his feet in an instant, pulling Theodora behind him as he drew his gun. Another shot rang out, this one close enough that they could hear the bullet whistle past. "Get in the tent," Sam ordered, his voice hard and commanding. "Stay low and do not come out unless I tell you to." Theodora wanted to argue, but the look on Sam's face told her this was not the time. She scrambled into the tent, grabbing her father's gun as another shot exploded in the darkness. Through the canvas, she could hear Sam moving around the camp, using their supplies and equipment as cover. "Come out and face us like a man, Yates," a voice called from the darkness. It was Carl Hutchins, his words slightly slurred as if he had been drinking. "Or are you going to hide behind a woman's skirts?" "I am right here, Carl," Sam called back. "But I am not interested in a gunfight. Why do not you and your brothers ride on out of here before someone gets hurt? You cost us a good claim, Carl shouted back. You and that interfering woman, we are not going to just let that slide. The claim was never yours, Sam said, his voice calm despite the danger. You tried to steal it and you got caught. Accept it and move on. The response was another gunshot, and this time Theodora heard Sam grunt in pain. Fear shot through her like lightning. She peered out of the tent flap and saw Sam crouched behind a stack of supply crates, his hand pressed to his left shoulder. Even in the dim firelight, she could see blood seeping between his fingers. Something inside Theodora snapped. She had spent her whole life being told she was too weak, too fragile, too much of a woman to stand up for herself. She had accepted help when she needed it, but she was not going to cower in a tent while Sam bled because of her claim. She crawled out of the tent, staying low as she had seen Sam do. She made her way around the fire to where he was taking cover, ignoring his whispered protests when he saw her. You are hurt, she said, examining his shoulder as another shot whistled overhead. It is just a graze, Sam said through gritted teeth. You need to get back in the tent. No, Theodora said firmly. This is my fight, my claim. I am not going to let you face them alone. Before Sam could argue further, the sound of horses approaching made them both tense, but these were coming from a different direction, from the road that led to Laredo. Moments later, a strong voice called out, "This is Marshal Davis. Everyone put your weapons down now." The shooting stopped abruptly. Theodora peeked around the crates and saw 3 men on horseback, one wearing the distinctive star of a United States Marshal. They had their guns drawn and were positioned to have clear shots at both the camp and the darkness where the Hutchins brothers were hiding. "Carl Hutchins, I know you are out there," the marshal called. "You and your brothers have about 10 seconds to show yourselves before I consider you fugitives and start shooting." There was a long pause, then the sound of horses moving. The Hutchins brothers emerged from the darkness, their hands raised. Even in the poor light, Theodora could see the fury on Carl's face. "These folks were shooting at us, Marshal," Carl said, trying to sound reasonable. "We were just defending ourselves." "That is interesting," Marshal Davis said dryly, "considering I received a telegram this afternoon from a colleague in Oklahoma reporting that you 3 were wanted for claim jumping and assault up there. Seems like you have made a habit of this kind of behavior." Carl's expression went from furious to shocked. "That is a lie. We never been to Oklahoma." "Save it for the judge," the marshal said. "You 3 are under arrest. Deputy, collect their weapons." One of the men with the marshal dismounted and began disarming the Hutchins brothers. Theodora felt Sam sag slightly beside her, relief evident in the release of tension from his body. Marshal Davis rode over to their position, his eyes taking in Sam's injury and the defensive setup of their camp. "Are you 2 all right?" he asked. "I will live," Sam said, "but I am glad you showed up when you did." "I got a message from Porter at the land office," the marshal explained. He was worried that the Hutchins brothers might try something after that confrontation yesterday morning. "I have been keeping an eye on them in town, but they slipped out earlier this evening. Figured they might be heading this way." "Thank you, Marshal," Theodora said, her voice shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. "They have been terrorizing me since they tried to steal my claim." "I heard about that," Davis said, his voice sympathetic. "Porter filled me in on the whole situation. I am sorry you had to go through this, miss, but at least you can work your claim in peace now. These 3 will be locked up for a good long while." They watched as the marshal and his deputy led the Hutchins brothers away, their horses' hoofbeats gradually fading into the night. When they were finally alone again, Theodora turned her attention to Sam's shoulder. "Let me see that wound," she said, her hands already reaching for the first aid supplies she kept in a box near her tent. "It really is just a graze," Sam protested, but he let her examine it anyway. In the firelight, Theodora could see that he was right. The bullet had carved a shallow furrow across the top of his shoulder, painful and bloody, but not serious. She cleaned it carefully with whiskey, trying to ignore Sam's sharp intake of breath, and bandaged it with strips of clean cloth. "You are lucky," she said as she tied off the bandage. "A few inches lower, and it could have been much worse." "I have always been lucky," Sam said, his eyes on her face. "Especially lately." The weight of his gaze made Theodora's hands still. They were so close, her fingers still resting on his bandaged shoulder, his face just inches from hers. The fear and danger of the past hour had stripped away all pretense, all the careful distance they had been maintaining. "Sam," Theodora whispered, not even sure what she wanted to say. He raised his good hand and gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt she had not known was there. "You were so brave tonight," he said softly. "Foolish, maybe, but brave. You could have been killed." "So could you," Theodora pointed out. "And you were only in danger because of me, because you were helping me protect my claim." "I was exactly where I wanted to be," Sam said, echoing his words from earlier in the evening. "Teddy, I need to tell you something." "What?" Theodora asked, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I think I am falling in love with you," Sam said, the words simple and honest. "I know it has only been a few days, and I know that is not enough time to really know someone, but I cannot help what I feel." Theodora's breath caught in her throat. She had been trying not to name the feelings growing inside her, trying to tell herself that it was just gratitude or the intensity of the situation. But hearing Sam say those words made her realize she had been lying to herself. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I have never felt this way before, not about anyone." Sam's smile was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Theodora found herself moving forward to meet him. Their lips touched softly at first, tentative and exploratory. Then Sam's hand came up to cup the back of her head, and Theodora's fingers tangled in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that made her feel like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want to leave when your claim is secure," he said quietly. "I want to stay here with you, help you build that dream you talked about, if you will have me." "Yes," Theodora said without hesitation. "Yes, I want that. I want you to stay." They stayed up the rest of the night, talking and stealing kisses, making plans for a future that had seemed impossible just days ago. By the time the sun rose over the Texas landscape, painting everything in shades of pink and gold, Theodora felt like a different person than the desperate woman who had woken to find her claim stolen. In the weeks that followed, Theodora and Sam fell into a partnership that worked both in their labor and in their hearts. They worked the claim together, and the gold they found was more plentiful than Theodora had dared to hope. Sam proved to be a natural at reading the land, finding places where gold was likely to have settled. They made regular trips to the assay office, building up savings that would allow them to eventually buy a proper piece of land. Marshal Davis stopped by occasionally to check on them and to update them on the Hutchins brothers' trial. The evidence against them, including testimony from several other miners and prospectors they had victimized, was overwhelming. They were sentenced to 10 years in prison, and Theodora felt a weight lift from her shoulders, knowing they would not be able to hurt anyone else for a long time. As autumn turned to winter, Sam built a more permanent structure on the claim, a small cabin with real walls and a proper roof. It was not fancy, but it was warm and dry, and to Theodora, it felt like a palace. They worked side by side every day, and every night they fell asleep in each other's arms, talking about their future and the life they were building together. On Christmas Eve, as snow began to fall over the Texas landscape in a rare winter display, Sam asked Theodora to marry him. He did not have a ring, but he offered her his mother's locket, a silver piece that had been in his family for generations. "It is not much," he said, his voice nervous in a way she had never heard before. "But I want you to have it. I want you to be my wife if you will have me." Theodora's answer was a kiss that conveyed everything words could not. They were married in Laredo 2 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Porter from the land office was there, along with Marshall Davis and several other folks they had gotten to know in town. It was not a fancy wedding, but it was full of genuine warmth and good wishes. That night, in their cabin on the claim that had brought them together, they celebrated the beginning of their married life. Sam was gentle and patient, and Theodora felt safe enough to let down every wall she had ever built. They made love by firelight, discovering each other in the most intimate way possible, and Theodora thought she had never been happier in her entire life. The years that followed were not always easy. Mining was hard work, and there were lean times when the gold seemed to have run out. But Sam and Theodora worked through every challenge together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing season. In the spring of 1883, Theodora discovered she was pregnant. Sam was overjoyed, his hands gentle as he placed them on her still, flat belly. They talked late into the night about names and futures, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. Their son was born in November of that year, a healthy boy with Sam's gray eyes and Theodora's determination. They named him Jacob, after Sam's brother, and Theodora cried as she held their baby for the first time, thinking about how much had changed since that terrible morning when she woke to find her claim stolen. By 1885, they had saved enough money from their gold claim to buy a proper ranch about 10 miles from Laredo. It was a beautiful piece of land with good water and grazing, perfect for the horses and cattle they planned to raise. Sam proved to be just as skilled at ranching as he had been at mining, and Theodora discovered she loved raising animals and working the land in a different way. They hired a couple of hands to help with the work, good men who treated Theodora with respect and who became like family. The ranch prospered, and so did their family. A daughter arrived in 1886, a tiny thing with red hair like her mother and a stubborn streak a mile wide. They named her Sarah, and she wrapped both her parents around her little finger from the moment she was born. Life on the ranch was full and rich. Jacob grew into a curious, adventurous boy who loved helping his father with the horses. Sarah was more interested in the business side of things, often accompanying Theodora to town and learning how to manage accounts and negotiate prices. They were different children, but both were loved fiercely. Sam and Theodora still took trips out to their original claim occasionally, working it when they had time and when the ranch did not need all their attention. It had become more of a sentimental journey than a necessity, a reminder of where they had started and what they had overcome together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Sam surprised Theodora with a gift. It was a gold ring, simple but elegant, with a small diamond set in the center. "I know I gave you my mother's locket when I proposed," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "But I wanted you to have a proper wedding ring, something that shows the world you are mine and I am yours." Theodora looked at the ring through tears of joy. "You did not have to do this," she whispered. "I wanted to," Sam said, pulling her into his arms. "You gave me everything, Teddy. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to stop drifting. You gave me love when I did not think I deserved it. A ring is small payment for all of that." "You gave me the same things," Theodora said, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You saved me, Sam, not just from the Hutchins brothers, but from a life of loneliness and struggle. You made me believe that good things could happen, that dreams could come true." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while the Texas sun set over the land they had built together. More years passed, filled with the rhythms of ranch life and the joys and challenges of raising children. Jacob grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with a gift for training horses that made him valuable beyond his years. Sarah remained sharp and business-minded, taking over more of the ranch's management as she got older. In 1892, Theodora and Sam celebrated the birth of their 3rd child, another boy they named Thomas. He arrived unexpectedly late in their lives when Theodora was 33 and had thought her childbearing years were behind her. But Thomas was a blessing, a happy baby who brought new energy to their household. Sam was a devoted father to all three children, patient and loving in a way that sometimes made Theodora's heart ache with love for him. He taught Jacob and Thomas to ride and rope, to be honest and hardworking. He taught Sarah that women could do anything men could do, pointing to her mother as the perfect example. The ranch continued to thrive. They expanded their holdings, buying adjacent land when it became available. They became one of the most respected families in the area, known for their fair dealing and quality livestock. But they never forgot their humble beginnings, and they were always willing to help others who were struggling to make their way. Marshall Davis remained a friend over the years, stopping by when he was in the area. He eventually retired and settled in Laredo, and he and his wife became regular visitors to the ranch. Porter from the land office also became a friend, helping them navigate various legal matters as their holdings grew more complex. In 1895, on a warm spring evening, Sam and Theodora sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset. Their children were grown or growing. The ranch was successful beyond their wildest dreams, and they had each other. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Sam asked, taking Theodora's hand. "When I first saw you outside the land office, looking like you were ready to take on the world?" "All the time," Theodora admitted with a smile. "I think about how scared I was, how certain I was that I had lost everything. And then you appeared, this stranger who decided to help me for no reason except that it was the right thing to do." "Best decision I ever made," Sam said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "You changed my life, Teddy. You gave me a purpose, a home, a family. You taught me that it was okay to stop running, to put down roots, and build something permanent." "We did that together," Theodora said. "Everything we have, everything we are, we built it together." Sam pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. They had been through so much together, from those terrifying early days, fighting for Theodora's claim, to building a life that exceeded both their dreams. They had faced down claim jumpers and hard times, celebrated births, and weathered losses. And through it all, their love had only grown stronger. "I love you," Sam said quietly. "I will love you until the day I die, and beyond." "I love you too," Theodora replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Always and forever." As the Texas night settled around them, filled with the familiar sounds of their ranch and the distant laughter of their children, Theodora reflected on the strange path that had led them to this moment. A stolen claim had seemed like the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning. It had brought Sam into her life, and together they had created something more valuable than any gold vein. Years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Jacob married a sweet girl from town in 1898 and brought her to live on the ranch, where they started their own family. Sarah showed no interest in marriage, preferring to focus on expanding the ranch's business ventures, and both Sam and Theodora supported her choice completely. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man with a love for books and learning, eventually going to college in Austin to study law. Sam and Theodora aged together gracefully, their hair turning gray and their faces gaining lines that spoke of years of laughter and hard work. They remained partners in every sense of the word, still working side by side on the ranch, even as they handed over more responsibility to Jacob and Sarah. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1895, they took a trip back to the original claim site. It was mostly played out now, the gold long since exhausted, but they had never sold the land. It held too many memories. They walked around the property, remembering those early days. The place where the tent had stood, where Sam had first kissed her, where they had faced down the Hutchins brothers together. It all seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. "No regrets?" Sam asked, as they stood looking out over the land. "Not a single one," Theodora said firmly. "Every struggle, every challenge, it all led us here. I would not change a thing." Sam smiled and pulled her into his arms. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life with you, and I want you to be happy. I am happy, Theodora said, tilting her face up for a kiss. Happier than I ever dreamed possible. The years moved on, bringing more grandchildren, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing their legacy continue through the next generation. The ranch remained in the family, growing and adapting with the changing times, but never losing the values that Sam and Theodora had instilled. When they were both in their 60s, sitting on the porch after a long day, just as they had done countless times before, Sam turned to Theodora with a soft smile. His hair was completely white now, and his face was weathered by decades of Texas sun, but his gray eyes still held the same warmth they had that first morning in Laredo. Do you remember what I told you that night? Sam asked. The night we first admitted we were falling in love? You said you were exactly where you wanted to be, Theodora recalled, her own hair silver now, but her memory still sharp. I am still exactly where I want to be, Sam said, squeezing her hand. Right here, with you, always with you. Theodora leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the peace that came from a life well lived and a love that had stood the test of time. Always, she agreed softly. They watched the sun set over their land, over the empire they had built from a stolen claim and a chance meeting. Around them, the sounds of family and home filled the air, their children and grandchildren going about the evening routines. It was a scene of domestic contentment that the desperate young woman and the drifting cowboy from 1881 could never have imagined. But they had made it real through hard work, determination, and a love that had proved stronger than any challenge they faced. From a terrifying morning when everything seemed lost to this peaceful evening surrounded by family and prosperity, their journey had been remarkable. And as the stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, Sam and Theodora Yates held hands and counted their blessings, knowing that the greatest treasure they had ever found was each other. The stolen claim had brought them together, but it was their love that had built this life, this family, this enduring legacy that would continue long after they were gone. They had faced down thieves and hardship, had worked until their hands were rough and their backs ached, had built something meaningful from nothing but determination and hope. And through it all, they had done it together. Two souls who had found each other at exactly the right moment and had never let go. As the evening deepened and the night birds began their songs, Sam and Theodora rose from their porch chairs and went inside their home, their hands still clasped together just as they had been on that very first night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but whatever came, they would face it as they had faced everything else for the past 40 years. Together. And that, Theodora thought as Sam kissed her goodnight, was the greatest gift of all. Not gold, not land, not wealth or success, but the simple, profound joy of sharing your life with someone who understood you, challenged you, supported you, and loved you without reservation. The stolen claim had been the beginning of their story, but love had written all the chapters that followed. And it was a story with a perfect, happy ending, the kind that Theodora had stopped believing in until the day a cowboy named Samuel Yates had appeared outside the land office and changed her life forever. Their love had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Their partnership had been forged in adversity and had created prosperity. And their family, the beautiful, boisterous, loving family they had built together, would carry on their legacy for generations to come. As Theodora drifted off to sleep that night in the arms of the man she loved, she thought about that frightened young woman who had woken to find her claim stolen and her dreams shattered. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, she would say this: sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Sometimes losing everything opens the door to gaining more than we ever imagined possible. And sometimes, when we are at our lowest point, exactly the right person comes along at exactly the right moment and everything changes. Sam stirred beside her, pulling her closer in his sleep, And Theodora smiled in the darkness. Yes, everything had changed that morning in 1881. The men who stole her claim had thought they were taking her future away, but instead, they had given her the greatest gift imaginable. They had given her a reason to fight, and in that fight, she had found Sam. She had found love, partnership, family, and a life richer than any gold vein could ever provide. And that was the perfect ending to their story, the story of a stolen claim and the love that bloomed in its wake, a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a love that became the foundation for everything good that followed. A happy ending in every sense of the word.